Every search you make, every video you stream, and every AI image you generate runs through a data center somewhere. These massive windowless warehouses are packed with servers that operate around the clock, processing data, consuming electricity, and generating enormous amounts of heat. And keeping all those machines cool comes with a hidden cost. Increasingly, that cost is being paid with something far more valuable than electricity: fresh water. For decades, the environmental debate around data centers focused on two things: electricity and carbon emissions. But there's another resource quietly under pressure: water. For years, water was treated as a minor operational detail. Now, that's changing fast. As artificial intelligence drives computing demand to unprecedented levels, data centers are generating more heat, and they need enormous amounts of water to keep their machines cool. And the biggest concern? Much of this demand is growing in regions where water is already scarce. The digital revolution may be powered by electricity, but increasingly, it's also being cooled by water. The remaining water becomes cooler and is sent back to absorb more heat. It's basically the same idea as sweating, just on an industrial scale. The method is relatively cheap and energy efficient compared with traditional air conditioning. That's why many large data centers use it, especially in hot climates. But there's a trade-off. Every drop of water that evaporates is effectively removed from the local water supply. It doesn't simply return to the tap, the river, or the aquifer. And there's another water footprint that's much harder to see: electricity. Many power plants, including coal, natural gas, and nuclear facilities, use large amounts of water to generate electricity. So even a data center that uses little water directly can still consume significant amounts indirectly, simply because it needs enormous amounts of electricity. And in some cases, that hidden water footprint can be even larger than the water used inside the data center itself. It's a cost most people never see. But behind every digital service, there may be a hidden chain of heat, electricity, and water. Quantifying how much water data centers use is difficult. Companies disclose their water consumption selectively, and different studies use different methods. But the estimates that do exist point in the same direction. Water use is rising, and rising quickly. According to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, one of the most widely cited sources on the subject, data centers in the United States directly consumed roughly 17.4 billion gallons of water in 2023. Other analyses estimate the figure could be slightly higher, somewhere between 17 and 19 billion gallons per year. And as artificial intelligence infrastructure expands, that number could increase dramatically. By 2030, some projections suggest that annual water consumption could reach between 60 and 110 billion gallons. But that's only the direct water footprint. There's another, much larger component: the water used indirectly to generate the electricity that powers these data centers. One widely cited estimate calculated that data centers' electricity consumption in 2023 was associated with roughly 211 billion gallons of water. That's more than 10 times the amount of water consumed directly at the facilities. And the numbers become even more striking when we look at individual data centers. A typical enterprise data center can consume somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 gallons of water every day. But a large hyperscale campus, the kind increasingly being built to train and operate artificial intelligence models, can consume between 1 and 5 million gallons every single day. To put that into perspective, one massive data center campus can use about as much water each day as a small town. The industry measures water efficiency using a metric called Water Usage Effectiveness, or WUE. It's measured in liters of water consumed for every kilowatt-hour of electricity used by the facility. The current industry average is around 1.8 liters per kilowatt-hour, but that number can vary enormously. It depends on factors such as the local climate, the cooling technology, and how the electricity itself is generated. For example, a facility operating in a hot region using evaporative cooling can have a much higher water footprint than a facility using dry cooling and electricity generated from solar power. So the real question isn't simply, how much water does AI use? It's also, where does that water come from, how is it used, and what happens to the water supply when AI infrastructure keeps expanding? Water stress isn't evenly distributed, and neither is data center construction. That's where the problem begins. Data centers tend to cluster in places where land is cheap, tax incentives are generous, and electricity is easy to access. But those same conditions often exist in regions that are already struggling with water shortages. One estimate suggests that roughly 2/3 of new hyperscale data center campuses built in the United States since 2022 are located in counties experiencing high or extreme water stress. The American West is a major flashpoint. In parts of the Phoenix metropolitan area in Arizona, new development has already faced restrictions because there simply isn't enough allocable drinking water available. And that's before fully accounting for the additional demand created by data centers. Similar conflicts are appearing elsewhere. Arizona is dealing with ongoing battles over groundwater. In Virginia, home to the world's densest concentration of data centers, officials are negotiating so-called no-net increase water agreements. In Chile, a partial permit connected to a Google facility was revoked. And in parts of the Netherlands, authorities have imposed a continuing moratorium on new data center construction. Different countries, different policies, but essentially the same underlying problem. A finite local water supply is being asked to support a rapidly expanding global industry. And the calculation becomes even more complicated when we consider electricity. The water footprint of a data center can vary dramatically depending on how its electricity is generated. Take the Pacific Northwest. The region relies heavily on hydropower, which has a very different water footprint from solar power. Compare that with California, where solar energy plays a much larger role and has a relatively low direct water footprint. The result is surprising. The exact same data center, using the exact same computer hardware, can have a dramatically different total water footprint depending on where it's built. And there's another important detail. Most of the water used by data centers, around 97%, according to many estimates, comes from ordinary municipal public water systems. That's the same water infrastructure supplying homes, farms, and businesses. So data centers don't operate in a completely separate water system. They compete for the same finite, rainfall-dependent supply. And when cities need to upgrade pipelines, treatment plants, reservoirs, or other infrastructure to support new industrial demand, someone has to pay for it. Often, those costs are recovered through utility rates, which means that in some cases, the cost of accommodating a massive new data center can ultimately appear on the monthly water bills of ordinary residential customers, rather than being paid entirely by the companies building the facilities. And that raises a much bigger question. When AI infrastructure expands, who should pay for the resources it consumes? Communities have started to notice, and they're pushing back, hard and increasingly fast. State legislatures have become a major battleground. In 2025 alone, more than 200 bills addressing data centers were introduced across all 50 U.S. states. More than 40 of those bills became law. That's an extraordinary level of legislative activity for a single industry. Many of these laws focus specifically on water withdrawal, water consumption reporting, or restrictions on where data centers can be built. But the pushback isn't coming only from state governments. Local communities are getting involved too. In just the first quarter of 2026, community-led campaigns helped cancel 20 proposed data center projects, representing a combined $41 billion in planned investment. And in many of these battles, water consumption was one of the main concerns. This represents a major shift. Just a few years ago, many local governments viewed data centers as an obvious economic opportunity. They offered tax incentives, attracted developers, and fast-tracked construction permits. Today, the conversation is becoming much more complicated. Governments are asking a different question. How much water should a community give up to support a data center? Regulation is also beginning to catch up, although progress remains uneven. In the United States, individual states have primary authority over water allocation. And much of the existing oversight still operates through broader environmental regulations, such as permitting under the Clean Water Act, rather than rules designed specifically for data centers. A few jurisdictions, however, are becoming more precise. One example comes from Ohio and the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact. Under the framework, a facility in the Lake Erie watershed that proposes withdrawing more than 1 million gallons of water per day must obtain a specific consumptive use permit. It must also demonstrate that the withdrawal will not cause significant harm. That's important because it focuses not simply on how much water a facility takes from the system, but on how much water it actually consumes. And that distinction could become increasingly important as AI-driven data center construction accelerates. To their credit, the largest data center operators are not standing still, partly because of genuine sustainability commitments, but also because water scarcity has become a direct threat to their ability to get new projects approved and built. One of the clearest technical solutions is closed-loop cooling. Instead of constantly evaporating water into the air, these systems circulate the same water repeatedly between servers and chillers through sealed pipes. Only small amounts need to be added to replace water lost through leaks or maintenance. This approach can reduce water consumption by up to 70% compared with traditional evaporative cooling. Microsoft is deploying this type of closed-loop system at new facilities in Arizona and Wisconsin starting in 2026. Each site is expected to save roughly 125 million liters of water every year. But there is a trade-off. Closed-loop systems are more expensive to build and require more sophisticated engineering than conventional evaporative cooling towers. Another major solution is reclaimed and recycled water. Amazon Web Services, for example, has committed to expanding its use of treated wastewater for cooling. The company plans to increase the number of data centers using reclaimed water from around 20 today to 120 by 2030. The shift is projected to save more than 530 million gallons of drinking water every year across the United States. In Umatilla, Oregon, AWS has gone a step further. The company has partnered with local farmers to recycle water used for data center cooling and redirect it toward agricultural irrigation. Instead of treating the water as waste, the system turns it into a shared local resource. Then there's another strategy that is becoming increasingly important, where you build the data center. But one major problem remains: transparency. Researchers studying the industry consistently point out that a data center's real water impact depends on highly local details. What is the source of the water? How much is actually consumed? Where does the discharged water go? And what is the condition of the surrounding watershed? Most companies simply don't publish enough information to answer all of these questions. A company-wide water sustainability pledge may sound impressive, but it doesn't necessarily tell a community living next to a massive data center whether its local river, reservoir, or aquifer is under increasing pressure. And that's where the debate over AI and water ultimately becomes much more complicated. The question isn't just how much water the technology uses. It's whose water is being used, where it comes from, and who bears the consequences when that supply becomes scarce. The story of data centers and water is, in miniature, the story of the AI era's broader trade-offs. Extraordinary technological capability is being built on infrastructure whose true resource costs remain mostly invisible to the people using the technology every day. Nobody sees the water evaporating from a cooling tower when they ask a chatbot a question or stream a movie. That invisibility is precisely what has allowed the problem to grow so quietly and so quickly. The good news is that this is a solvable problem, not an inherent one. Closed-loop cooling, reclaimed wastewater, and smarter decisions about where data centers are built can all reduce water use. And the industry's largest players are already proving that these solutions can work at scale. The bad news is that adoption remains uneven. Transparency is still limited, while the pace of AI-driven construction is outpacing the adoption of water-conscious engineering in many of the regions where it matters most. What happens next will likely be decided less by corporate sustainability reports and more by state legislatures, water boards, and local zoning meetings that are increasingly pushing back against new projects.